Okay, so what I've decided to do here is just make a little video on how to set this Clio up, what I do to make it handle like it handles, and to try and dial out that oversteer that we all suffer with every time we jump in this bloody car. Now I think I've got rid of the oversteer, the lift-off oversteer, pretty well, and I think if everyone follows this base setup, I think we can have some good racing, and there'll be no complaints of this unreal lift-off oversteer. And of course, when I first done this car, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. It was completely unrealistic. But bearing in mind, I wasn't default setup. Now we know all the default setups in this are okay-ish, but with this car, it's horrific. So basically, we'll go through these. Tyre compounds it's pretty self-explanatory, so I don't even need to say that. Just leave it on automatic by weather, and whatever weather comes up, it'll put you on the correct tyre for that. So unless you want to be clever and do it this way, but it will rain one day and you'll forget to put your wets on, so I would just leave it on automatic. So with tyre pressures, basically how I see it and how it works is the lower the tyre pressure, the quicker your tyres will heat up. But lower it too much, your tyres can overheat in a very, very fast period of time. But with the Clio, that won't happen. Unless, with the front tyre pressures I've found 155 to be okay. You probably could get down to about 150 to make them heat up quicker, which would be beneficial. But then again, we are talking about dialing out that oversteer, so what you don't want to do is heat up the fronts more than the rears, and then you've got that oversteer problem again. So I'd probably leave it in between 155 and 150 anyway. You can go lower, but I really wouldn't bother. That's probably too low, and your tyres will heat up too quick, and you'll get too much grip at the front. So 155, I've got it on at the front, and at the rear, what I've done here, you can see on the left I got 145, and on the right rear I got 140. And the reason for that is tracks that are predominantly clockwise, i.e. this one. We're at the Algarve track here, so that predominantly the inside right rear wheel doesn't get used as much because it's always lifting off the ground through the corners, meaning that there isn't much pivoting going on that particular tyre. So you want the pressure as low as possible on the right hand side, okay, and the lowest it goes is 140 bar, so leave that as low as possible. So basically any work that gets put into that tyre is the maximum amount of work it has done, and however hot that tyre gets is the hottest it will get. So try and keep that as low as possible on clockwise tracks. On counterclockwise tracks, let's say tracks for like Laguna Seca, let's say, then just reverse this process and put 145 on this side and 145 on the left and 140 on the left. And to do that, just press your triangle button at the top, where up there where it says above brake pressure, it says symmetrical. Just click your triangle button, that will uncheck that box. Now you can go down and make individual adjustments without affecting the right tyre. See? So for clockwise circuits, I'd keep this at 145 and 140 on this side, and for counterclockwise, 145 on this side and 140 on this side. That will keep the tyres nice and hot. You probably could get away with both running them both at 140, but for this track Algarve, I do like that. Brake pressure, I know these cars have ABS with real assists, but if you're like me and you don't like running ABS, it is actually a bit quicker without running with ABS if you can modulate your brake pedal well enough. I've got my brake pressure at 90 here. Actually, it probably would be better to have it around about 87 mark for this track, because there's some quite heavy braking zones as well, so you don't want to be locking up them fronts. Brake balance I've got at 57. On stock I think it's around about 53, but I've got it on 57. Again, that will limit the amount of oversteer you get into the corners. So if you're turning into a corner and you're on the brakes at the same time you're turning, which this track has a lot of those corners where you have to brake and turn at the same time, the more brake balance in the front of the car will limit the amount of power put into the rear of the tyres, meaning you won't lock up the rears, meaning it won't oversteer. So more front brake bias for these sorts of tracks are quite good. Moving on to suspension, camber angle here. The rear camber angle on default I believe is set, sorry, the front camber angle is set to 3 on default. The reason I've turned that down is to get more grip on the rear, and I'll explain why. We are trying to dial out the oversteer, but I wanted some more grip on the rear for reasons. But we can dial out oversteer with the differential, which I'll show you in a minute. but what I tend to do is leave it at 2.5, 2.5. I don't want to get into too much, but that is a good base to have. Ride height, I've completely slammed the car as low as I go. The rear, I wouldn't slam down to 105 because then that keeps the car without any what's the word I'm looking for? Without any stance effectively at the rear. You want the car to be stanced at the rear so you can get that flow of air underneath the car, which then you get more front bite as well. Again, that will make the car a little bit tail happy, but we can dial that out with other things, which I'll show you again. Steering ratio is usually on default down to about 12. I would strongly suggest raising it up to 15 to 16. I got it on 15. That means more wheel input will be made with your steering wheel. Basically, if you have it down to 12, what that means is that if you turn your steering wheel a tiny bit, it means it makes the car move a lot. It means not a lot of input in your steering wheel needs to be done to make the car turn. Now with a car that's this pokey and this pointy, I really would suggest turning it up, because that means you have to put more wheel movement in your steering wheel to make the car turn, which is good because it means you can fine tune it a bit more with the steering ratio up higher. So higher steering ratio is better for these cars. Front toe, I wouldn't worry about that, leave it on minus 0.2. Rear toe angle was my secret weapon for GT3, I think, for handling the car. The rear toe, basically, if you turn this up, let's say to 1, that's the maximum it will go in this, that will make the rear of the car extremely stable, really stable through the corners and so on. But that will give you an unreal amount of understeer. It's pointless. You will get no grip at the front whatsoever. So you need to, this is a bit of a balancing act with this one, I think. So you've got to, I've got it down at 0.3. You can go to the minors, but that's absolutely pointless. For instance, if you had it on 0.5, minus 0.5, the car will be very responsive, very responsive, but the back end will be all over the place. It's just pointless. So I found a good balance would be 0.3. So the higher this is, the more stable the rear becomes, but the more understeer you get. The lower, the less grip on the rear, but more on the front. So I've got it at 0.3 on the rear there. Moving on to the dampers. Now bump stops, I've changed the bump stop somewhat here. I believe the rear bump stop is at stock, it's at 50, that's the lowest it goes, that's quite good. But when you've got a slammed car, you want these bump stops a little bit higher than usual, because effectively 50mm bump stop, that will stop the suspension bottoming out and again stopping the rear from spinning around. You could probably raise it up a little bit more, but that's stiffening up the rear, meaning you'll get more oversteer. So keep it on at 50 and that will keep the rear nice and soft. The front bump stops, I believe, were about, that's what they were on, 35. So this is quite important. On default, they're on 35, meaning the front has a lot more grip than the rear. Now to dial out that oversteer, we want to lose some of that grip on the front. So what I did is I raised the bump stops to 45, stiffening up the front slightly, meaning the rear has more grip, meaning the lift-off oversteer is getting better. The slow bumps, again, you've just got to, I mean, it's how fast the suspension comes back into place after going over the bumps. Okay, so I've got this, I think this is standard 115, I think 115 was a standard at the front. I didn't touch much at the front, I'll be honest. It's the rear, I softened the rear up. So if you look at the slow bump rear to the slow bump front, you'll see I'm on a lot, it's a lot softer on the rear than the front slow bump, meaning that there's going to be a lot more, the back end's going to be very soft, very spongy, very very flexible, let's say, which means it will dig into the circuit a bit better, meaning the lift-off's oversteer again is getting better. I think this standard, it was up here somewhere. It was ridiculous. It was too high, too stiff. So I've lowered it. What did I just have that at? 68.5. So, and again for the slow rebound, do exactly the same. Loosen it off. The front is very stiff. Look, 2200. So, and the slow rebound is at 6300. So keep that at that sort of. And it goes for the slow rebound as well. So everything make it a little bit softer. The bump transition I didn't really touch too much. I've not really found too much time gain from this. Again, bump transition here looks a lot stiffer than the front, so I don't really know. maybe this is something I'll test out again, so someone else can test that for me, the bump transitions maybe, and just see what difference that makes. But again, just make the thing softer at the rear, and this really helps. And the front bump stop, make the front bump stops tighter, and that will create more grip at the rear for you. Fuel load, so on the night we're going to be running 0 fuel, as in the fuel won't come into play. So make sure for every race you do for the Clio Championship, make sure you got your fuel load on 1 litre. You won't need any more than that because there won't be any fuel load. So you want to make your car as light as possible and as fast as possible. Radiator, just completely shut the radiator off. Again, you'll get maximum speed. Engine braking, you can how do I, this basically, okay, so this was on, I think it was on about 3 or 4. Okay, when I lowered it down to 0, I did find it helped a lot with the lift off oversteer, but I say a lot, it helped a bit. It didn't make a massive difference, but it did make a difference. So I've always had the engine braking on 0 on this one. Okay, so that did you know, help with the lift off oversteer. Effectively the lower it uses the braking, uses the engine to brake, as well as your brakes there. So you can, as soon as you lift off the throttle, you change down the gears, the engine braking comes into play, and that helps. So and your gears stay the same. Traction control is on 100%, meaning, by the way, traction control on 100% means you do not have traction control. Okay, I can't stress this enough. People keep saying that. I've had a lot of people say that when they're traction control, they think they're turning their traction control off, right, by putting it down to 1 or 2 or 3. They think that's off. It's not. That means you've got maximum traction control. We don't have traction control for this championship, so I wouldn't worry, but that's just a future reference for other championships or cups you may do. So if you don't want traction control, you like to feel everything under the throttle, then turn it to 100. ABS strength, there is ABS in these cars. Whether you want to run it or not is up to you. But I strongly, if you're going to run ABS, don't run 100% ABS, please don't, because your car will be horrible to drive. It will twitch, it'll be twitchy all over the place when you're going into the braking zones. So if you're going to use ABS, I would probably say you run something around about 82 to about 75, anywhere in between that would be good, and a fuel mapping you don't have to worry about. Right, now differential, this bit is the bit that stops the lift off oversteer. This is very important. The bias coast ratio is effectively, when you're off the throttle, it's the coasting of the car and what the car does. Now the higher the LSD here, the better the car will handle under neutral handling, let's say, and going into corners. So it says there, the higher values for the coast bias ratio will create a larger locking effect when off the throttle. So effectively it will increase the stability during turning. Okay, I'll say that again. So the higher the coast ratio, it creates a larger locking effect within the LSD. Okay, and it says there to increasing this will increase stability on turning. Okay, important that is. Okay, on default this is down to about, I don't know, 3 or something. It's just it's rubbish. So turn that up to at least 5. I mean, you can go up so high with this thing. Look, I've not even experimented with this. You can go up to 8. I've not even tried that yet. You will, I mean, the higher it is, I'm guessing you'll have a lot more understeer, but this is the key to stop this oversteer business. The preload, I've turned the preload up. I think I turned it up. Did I turn it up? I can't remember if I turned it up or down now. I think I turned it up. There was a reason for me turning it. Low settings here will improve the maneuverability. I can't even say that bloody word. Whilst the setting, whilst the setting is higher, you will lose a bit of that twitchiness in the car, which again will lose the, you won't lose the back end as much. So I sort of thought, this is my thinking, this isn't genuinely how it acts, but the more preload, I found the car wasn't as twitchy, which I like. So I turned the preload up, and that felt better. Clutches, I have no idea. I've not experimented with clutches, so again, maybe someone else can experiment with that for me. And the coast ramp, okay, this is another one. This is as important, if not more important, than the bias coast ratio here. The coast ramp on default is somewhere like that. It's insane. Again, it's something to do with the coasting. And basically, the lower ramp angles here create more force on the clutch friction plates, thereby increasing the locking effect. Okay, this can help stabilize the car on corner entry. Okay, that there is the God save of these cars, this coast ramp right here. lower the ramp ankles and it will stabilize the car on corner entry. That means the rear. Okay, so lower this, lower it right down to 20 or 25. I had it on 25 and I'm actually going to lower it to 20 because I think that would probably be better. Lower it down as far as it goes. That will stop your lift off oversteer. Now of course you're going to get some lift off oversteer. I mean, if you go into corners too hot, it doesn't mean, you know, just because you've got this on 20 now, as low as you can go, it doesn't mean you can just go and wang it into corners now and expect you're going to get through the corners, because you're not. You still have to drive them like, you know, like you would a road car, but it's just, you know, a track car effectively this is. So you've got to be driving it as you would a car. You can't just wang it into the corners and expect it to have grip like an F1 car, because it's not. It's a road car. So no matter how fast you go into a corner, if you go, you know, full guns blazing into a corner and you think you can actually take it faster, you'll get oversteer because you're going too fast into the corner and you're asking the car to do too much. So you still need to drive it sensibly, but this will stop that problem of the lift off oversteer, which we all hate so much. And I think I done something to this as well. What did I do to this? Highest viscous locking will add stability during turning. So yeah, I raised that as well. I think I did raise that because I think that's on about 250. So I raised that to 450 because that aids stability when turning in. So that's very important as well. Turn that up. I believe you can go up to 500. There you go. So I'm 450. So I'm nearly maxing that out as well. And that, I have no idea. I'm not really interested in that. So that's effectively what I do. So the main things to concentrate on is bias coast, turn that up. Preload, turn that up. Coast ramp, turn that down. And viscous lock, turn that up. Very important. And don't forget to select 1 litre for the racing and everything. And the dampers, make sure you soften the rear up. Put some more bump stop on the front. Suspension, take some camber out the front tyres. Now you can see why I took camber out the front tyres, because really I'm taking camber out the front tyres to make the back end more loose. Okay, and the reason I've done that was because I've adjusted all of this here. So I've made the car so stable at the back. I've got a lot of understeer. I had some understeer. So what I done to get rid of some of that understeer is I took some of the front camber off, and that's why I done that. I took some of the front camber off, so when I turned into the corners I had a bit more front bite, because basically the less camber you have on the car, if you went down to zero camber on front and rear, the car's very twitchy on the straights, and turning into a corner, the car's very twitchy, but it doesn't have a lot of grip going through the corners. So that's basically why I done that, as I lowered the front camber just to get the front to twitch into the corner a little bit more, get the front to turn in, bite in quickly, and then that 2.5 degrees camber then comes into play once we're going through the corner, so that helps that. The rear toe angle, to add more stability, if you're still struggling with a bit of lift off oversteer after all of these settings, just raise this. Just raise that slightly and see what happens. You'll find you'll have more stability, but you will have more understeer. But this here, I've still got loads to play with. So if I'm still suffering with oversteer, I can adjust this. I mean, it's brilliant. You've still got loads to play with there. So that's it. That'll be even more stable. But keep it on 0.3 for now. And then the tyres and brakes. Don't forget your tyre pressures. The lower the tyre pressures, the faster your tyres will heat up. The rear tyres need to be lower pressure than the front at all times on every track, because the rear is a front-wheel drive car, so they'll always heat up quicker. So the rear tyre pressures keep as low as you can. And if it's raining, then I haven't got a clue what to do. I'll probably just go out with this dry setup, put wet tyres on, and have done with it. But anyway, so I hope that's been fairly helpful. Also, when you go to save your setup, I've noticed this because it's done my head in recently. Once you're done with that, go down to press X for done. Okay, save, and then just save over existing setup slot. That will then save it, save complete. Okay, after every session, after practice, you need to reload your setup for qualifying. Once qualifying has finished and you're into your race, you have to reload your setup again. Don't assume that you will have the same setup on, because I've done this many times and my setup has not been put into the race, and I've ended up going to the race with 50 litres in the car or some shit. So you have to keep reloading this. It's ridiculous. I think it's stupid, and there should be a patch to patch this up, but at the moment I can't stress enough, you have to load your setup after every single session. Okay, so please do that. I don't want anyone complaining that they didn't load the setup on. They got a because it will send you out on a default setup. If you don't load your setup up, it will send you out on a default setup, and you'll have loads of lift off oversteer, and it will wreck your whole evening. So now I've said it, I'm in the clear. It's up to you guys to do that. Okay. So yeah, anyway, so I hope this video has helped you guys in understanding the setup a little bit more, and go and test some things out yourself. But I think that is a very, very good setup I've just given you there, and that will work for most circuits. Other than that, cool. Thanks a lot.